What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and here we are talking about the second film in the Smile franchise, once again coming from writer-director Parker Finn, and I have my full review for you guys right now. Written and directed once again by Parker Finn, who originated the Smile concept from his short known as Laura Hasn't Slept. This film stars people like Naomi Scott, Kyle Gallner, Lucas Gage, Ray Nicholson, and more. So back in 2022, when the first Smile film came out, it actually made my top 10 for the year. It just creeped its way in at number 10, but I really enjoyed that film. And it was a film that had a lot of clashing opinions. Some people really loved the film. It seemed like it was one of the biggest standout horror films for a percentage of the audience. And then there was another percentage of the audience that felt the film was fairly safe and very reminiscent of other films that we had seen in the horror genre. Some of the people kind of feeling like it was a conventional horror film. And that opinion and that difference of opinion was something I could totally see, because while I did feel the film felt like a conventional horror film in a lot of ways and borrowed similar ideas in a way from something like maybe It Follows and many other films that have some sort of entity that's transferred from person to person due to some sort of thing that happens, I found that the film was really ultimately eerie for me. And as somebody who watches a lot of horror and doesn't really oftentimes find themselves afraid of anything in the horror genre and very rarely goes home ever feeling scared or creeped out in the dark, Smile was like the first film in a long time where I was at home and I would turn the light off in one room to go into another room, and I started to feel a little bit of a scurry in my feet as I started to kind of think in my mind that I was seeing someone in the corner staring at me creepily. I thought that the movie did a great job of having a very eerie and scary atmosphere, and so going into Smile 2, I was pretty excited, especially since the writer and director of the original film and the short that this whole idea is based on, Parker Finn, had been coming back to do this film as well. When I saw that Naomi Scott was the lead actress as well, I was very excited because she's somebody I've really enjoyed ever since I first saw her to my memory in Power Rangers. My wife actually, as we sat down for this, reminded me she was in that Disney movie Lemonade Mouth from years ago, which I have seen, but honestly I completely forgot she was in that movie. But once I originally was, in my mind, introduced to her properly in Power Rangers and then in things like the Aladdin remake, in the various things that she's been in, she's always really impressed me as an actress. So when I saw that she was going to be the main star here, when I saw that the entire premise seemed a lot bigger than the original film, I was definitely intrigued to see what this movie was going to be all about and if I enjoyed it and if it was able to creep me out on the same level that the first film did. But before we get into my thoughts on the film and how it compares to the original or if it's a worthy sequel, let's get into what this movie is all about. The movie opens up and we're introduced to Sky Riley, a big pop star played by Naomi Scott, and she's just about to start a new press tour. She's about to start the new press cycle for a ginormous tour for her music that's about to come down the line, and this is coming right after she's been out of the spotlight for a little bit over a year after having some mental issues that she was going through, a lot of mental health problems, as well as dealing with recovering from an accident that really wounded her but unfortunately also killed somebody she loved dearly, played by Ray Nicholson, the son of Jack Nicholson, funny enough, who looks just like his dad in this film. As she's starting to get into the whole music tour world once again and starting to get out into the public eye once again, she ends up seeing one of her old high school mates known as Lewis, played by Lucas Gage, actually is struggling. Something's wrong with him, and this eventually leads to him killing himself in front of her, now transferring the Smile demon onto her. For anybody who does not remember what happened in the first film, or maybe you didn't see the first film, pretty much the Smile demon serves as a metaphor for trauma, and the whole premise is that if you have this demon latched onto you, you have about a week or so as it completely starts to ravage your mind, making you see things and consistently finding yourself in a situation where you're seeing someone off in the distance or nearby who is smiling at you, some sort of eerie, creepy demon that is just smiling at you. And as you start to lose your mind, this eventually leads to that demon taking control of you and causing you to kill yourself in front of another person. This then transfers that demon on to the other person, and now they will live the next week of their life in an absolute living hell. So Naomi Scott's character Sky Riley here finds herself on the receiving end of said demon, and now amidst all of this stuff she's got going on with the public eye on her and this big tour upcoming for the return to her musical career, she now has to suffer from this smile demon completely tormenting her life. And I won't say much more about the base premise. In a lot of ways very similar to the first film, except the first film was a lot quieter and a lot smaller. That first film focuses on a character who is not in the public eye, instead somebody who's dealing with mental health illness herself, somebody who works with people who have mental health issues. She's got a troubled past to some degree that she's working through, but not to the same extent as the character that we're following here, who is already struggling with a lot of the weight and the baggage of the things that have come in her life before this is all happening, and now the torment of this demon is just making it way worse. So this film in a lot of ways feels bigger, but the question is it better? And I think it's really going to depend on your personal taste. Having just got out of the film, I talked to a couple of people on the way out, and there were a couple varying opinions. One of the individuals thought that the film was better than the original, that they liked this one way more. One of the other ones was kind of like, I liked the first one, but I wasn't too crazy about this one. I personally am of the opinion that I enjoyed the first one more than this one, but I would give them about a very similar score on a 5-star basis. I think that they're both 4-star movies in my general opinion, but I talk about the various opinions because I think that this is going to be a film that is going to have a similar reaction that the first film did. I think that we live in a time now where we have an oversaturation in the horror genre, and when it comes down to some sort of entity that's transferred from one person to the next, it's something that we've seen time in and time out. And in the world of Smile, I think that it was already playing with a concept that felt familiar to people, but was able to kind of have its own originality to give it its own fresh tone and vibe in the first film. So now in the case of Smile 2, if you've seen the first film and you've seen plenty other films that have this entity that transfers from one person to the next, there is a lack of freshness that this film kind of has. And I think that this film is going to definitely be better for those who aren't as familiar with horror concepts that are similar to this. With that said though, I honestly really enjoyed this film, and I think a huge reason for that, for sure, is Naomi Scott in our lead role. Throughout the course of the film, she starts to lose her mind as she's being tormented by this smile demon. And in the first film, it felt like you were following a character who, for the most part, was pretty well put together. They have some darkness in their past, but they, are trying to find a logical rationale to what's going on throughout the course of the film. Whereas in this situation, you're following a character who's already dealing with a bunch. She's already had so much happen in the past, and she's already not okay. So to add on this extra level of not okay on top of it, the movie does a lot to kind of keep you all over the place, just like her character is. And so because of that, there's a lot of dream sequences, there's a lot of sequences that turn out to be just in her mind, or we end up learning that scenes were interpreted differently in her mind versus what actually happened. And I think that this film does a great job of kind of putting you in this very crazy, messy mind that our main character is kind of going through over the course of the film. And I think Naomi Scott's performance is what elevates all of these moments. She's a great actress, but I think some of the greatest things that she has in her arsenal as an actress were definitely showcased in this film, as she had to kind of show a wide array of emotions of this person who's trying to keep it together while she's in the public eye, but is quickly finding herself losing it day in and day out as this smile demon tries to take over her. And I think that Naomi Scott gives a phenomenal performance here. And if I had to move on to the other elements I really enjoyed about this film, on a filmmaking level, I think it's an incredibly well shot film. There's some great cinematography, some great shots throughout the course of the film that oftentimes add to the eerie and creepy tone. When it comes down to the scares, I don't think it was as creepy and scary as the first film in my personal opinion, but there were some eerie and creepy moments in the film that are elevated a lot by the sound design, the special effects, and the cinematography and the performers that are in these sequences. A lot of the people who are doing the creepy smiling in this movie definitely practiced those smiles to be as creepy as they possibly could, and I think Naomi Scott playing off of them oftentimes really elevated these moments. So you have really solid filmmaking all around, and when it comes to the blood, guts, and gore that you get to see throughout the course of the film, some of it is digital at times, but there is a grand use of practical effects as well that I do think really elevate these moments and add for some really big over-the-top body horror moments. Though in a year year where we've had things like The Substance or Terrifier 3 fairly recently, this is fairly tame in the world of body horror this year. But there's still some moments that if you are squeamish and some things you're very uncomfortable with, like needles or glass shards or different things like that, there are going to be some elements of this film that will make the squeamish very squeamish. So yeah, I think the film is very well made, and I think that it's really going to be dependent on you, on whether or not you enjoy this film. Because when somebody tells me that they see this film and think it just felt fairly conventional in the horror world, I feel like I'll understand it. But if somebody walks out of this film and they thought it was a great time and found themselves really engrossed in what was going on, I can also say I can totally agree. Overall, I found myself really impressed by the filmmaking here, the performances, most notably that central performance by Naomi Scott, and all of the practical effects that were in this film really elevated it to be a really entertaining time. The pacing is also well done as well, as I found myself completely engaged in what was going on and never really found myself bored over the course of the 2-hour runtime. What I will say works against this film is that if you were somebody like me and goes to the theaters fairly often and you've seen the trailer for this movie dozens of times like I have, unfortunately, it does show way too much of the movie, and there was an element of this film that didn't really feel like it had that much freshness or all that much surprise, because some of those key moments that do give this film a creepy edge are all showcased in the trailer, especially that original trailer that played. And I feel like I saw the movie trailer over and over and over again over the course of weeks and months of going to the theater. I go to the theater at least once or twice a week, sometimes more, it depends, and it felt like at times I could see the trailer for Smile every single time I was at the theater. So as somebody who sees the trailer a lot and had seen the trailer a lot, it did take away from a lot of those surprises. But I do think if you hadn't seen the trailer much, or maybe, you're catching this on streaming way down the line and you don't really remember the trailer, that'll be to your benefit, honestly. But if you are, watching this review here and you saw the trailer, there's a good chance that the first half of the film, you may feel like you're kind of checking off a box in your mind or checking off various boxes as you're getting to these sequences that were big key moments in the trailer, which again, I think did remove a little bit of that shock and awe and surprise. But as you get into the third act of the film and things start to go all over the place, I feel like that's where things really pick up. I feel like that's where majority of the film's surprise is, and I think for the most part all of that stuff was really exciting and entertaining to watch, ultimately leading to an end that I think is going to feel fairly predictable and a fairly safe for some people, but an ending that I do feel is fairly effective and will possibly lead into a really interesting, maybe third and final chapter in the Smile franchise. Who knows? I think if they do more than the third one, it could be messy, but I do think that this film leaves things in an interesting enough place where a third film could make for a really interesting Smile film. Overall, I think Smile 2 is a worthwhile sequel in the Smile franchise that feels very reminiscent of the first film, and I think it's also something that you can walk into not having seen the first film and feel like you can follow it enough. It does enough to re-explain what's going on here to somebody who hasn't seen the first film, and the only real tie that the film has is the character played by Kyle Gallner, the character of Joel, who was one of the last surviving characters in the first film. His presence in this film is the only real thing that ties it directly to that first film, and in a lot of ways this film on its own stands on its own. So I am curious to hear the various opinions on this film, but this is a film that's similar to the first one. While I didn't think it was as creepy as that first one, is a film that I really enjoyed, but a film I can understand if other people kind of feel it's just another conventional horror film. But for whatever opinions people have on this film, whether they enjoy it or not, one thing I don't think is going to be a negative that people have about this film is Naomi Scott's performance, who I do think is the standout here, and I do think she does an incredible job. So I'm going to stop rambling now. Clearly I enjoyed the film, and there's a lot I think that is enjoyable about this film, but I do think the fact that this is a sequel that doesn't have as much originality as the first one, and the fact that we've seen a lot of films even since Smile that have kind of done this transferring entity kind of premise, I do think it's a situation where its lack of freshness may kind of work against certain people's reactions to this film, but I still think it's a movie that's worth checking out, and I think it's a horror film that is going to be a standout kind of topic in the world of horror by the time we get to the end of 2024. So I look forward to hearing the various opinions on this one. Did you like Smile? Did you not like Smile 2? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below. Let me know what you thought about the film, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.